as someone who I consider a very important figure in the strength and conditioning community, what advice would you give someone who's starting out, who has aspirations to either be professional, own their own facility and or start to go ahead and get into strength and conditioning side of things in a collegiate aspect or in a professional aspect?
The first thing I would say is learn the history of your trade. I think too many people just think they know everything and don't understand why there is a opportunity to be a strength coach or even a private sector. Like I consider, like I just had this like Jesse's in the private sector. Now I'm in it, but Jesse to me is not a personal trainer. He is a private sector coach, and that is relationship to he coaches athletes. Now in the general pop scheme of things, he's a personal trainer. But in the athletic things, he's a private sector coach. And you have to differentiate that because that's not fair to those people who work in sports performance facilities and get labeled as a general pop title when they're not. The private sector has exploded. And again, when you learn the history of it, there was people before Mark Verstegen and API and Exos, but it was his vision and how he promoted private sector elite training coaches that have made it what it is today. Now, there was the Mike Boyles and the Chip Smiths and the guys down and the Lawrence Seagraves before that and what they were doing at Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy before Mark exploded. The same way I explained about with Boyd Epley. Know where you came from so you know what to do and understand who to study and why they've had such sustainable careers. So I think knowing the history of where you're headed is very, very important. And not where you have to be a historian, but enough to know that strength training didn't start with Louis Simmons. That makes sense. And I'm a big fan of Louis. He's opened my eyes and opened up many eyes to everybody who's out there in the world of strength training, whether it's on the professional, collegiate, powerlifting, etc. But even then, like we talked about, read between the lines. Something's always missing, something always not compatible to what you're trying to do. The other thing I would say is find you some mentors. Like, Jesse, I have the utmost respect for Jesse. I was telling my wife last night that I love Jesse and Mark but Jesse, I consider Jesse one of my virtual coaches. So because of the regard that I have, because here's what you learn about when you're honest with yourself, and I probably knew this a long time ago when I would go to when I went to Dave and Jim Wendler's seminars. Here's what you learn about yourself when you're a strength and conditioning coach for athletes. And I say this in coaching technique. It's really about a level of competency. Like how well can you competently get things across to your athletes? Because when it comes to exercise technique, I don't need a competitive athlete. I don't need a competitive lifter who plays football. I need a competitive football player who's competent in lifting. And what happens with the strength and conditioning coach, because there's so much things intermingled. Like if you really ask me what I am an expert in, I'm an expert in competently structuring high number group training sessions for athletes. That's what I'm an expert in. I'm extremely competent and in some ways exceptionally competent in programming and some other things. But like in exercise technique in particular, I'm above competency, but I don't know if I can consider myself a professional. Like when I listen to Dave Tate and guys like Jesse break down a squat or a deadlift, I don't have that skill set. I have the skill set to be very, very good at the guys that I coach because they ain't going into no meets and they're not going to deadlift 1,000 pounds or 800 pounds. It's just like if you wanted me to coach you as a power lifter, I can coach you to deadlift and squat and bench press 600, 600, and 400, and then you got to go find somebody else. Because to train guys who have done that heavier loads than that, that's just it's a different mindset that I can't discuss. And two, it's different training. So know your role is very, very important. Know where you are and really try to evaluate what you are. Like it took me a long time to really coach. Like, what are you really, really good at? I'm really good at getting a bunch of dudes to work hard or a bunch of women to work hard in a group setting with a highly organized plan and extremely competent lifting. The other thing I'd say, and again, that goes back to mentorship, having people who you are willing to listen to criticism, because most people don't like criticism. And the hardest criticism is self-criticism. Like, what can you do for yourself that you know if you look in the mirror you can't lie about? That's extremely hard. I would say, as far as education, the number one education you can do is coach. I mean, everybody wants to talk about read a book a month, or I've read 10,000 pages this year. That's all fine and well, but if you can't coach, it doesn't matter. So get on the floor and coach. You want your best professional development is to keep coaching. That's why I want to know, like for me, luckily my son was with me all summer, so I got to coach a lot this summer, but now for me to continue to coach, I've got to find ways to figure that out on my own, to get back into some type of floor coaching to keep my skills alive. And again, what you learn is in coaching, if you say, like Jesse asked, what levels do you want to coach at? I don't know what kind of coach you want to be. Because if you coach professionals, you're managing, if that makes sense. You'll have some guys you still get to develop, your practice squad, some younger rookies who still need development in the O-line, D-line, possibly. More so now with the way the offenses have changed in football. But if you want to be a developer, then you want to be a youth coach, like in the private sector, adolescent coach, or a high school coach. If you want to be a individual who continues to be a developer, but also have more of an impact on life, then you might want to be a college coach, and more possibly, a more mature high school kid who gets that you're not berating him and trying to make him cry, that you're trying to teach them how to be adults. So it comes into those things. Like, what is your aspirations? Like, what do you see yourself? Like, I've learned a lot, like communication. Everybody talks about communication, but what I've really learned about communication after 9 years in the NFL is a lot of times your message is correct. It's how the tone and the verbiage you use. So like in the early 90s, most strength coaches for football in college, F this, F that, you're soft, you're a P, you're this, you don't work hard. It's like they beat them down, negatively crush them, and then build them up. Well, what you learn in the pros is you can't do that to professionals. And although the message is the same, the tone and the ability to communicate is different. And I wouldn't change. It's just an evolution of who you are and a maturity process. But I know this, that as well as I got my message across in the 90s, that if I go back to college in the 2020s, or what I learned in the NFL, I will be so much more proud of myself and know that my thoughts would resonate even deeper with the athletes of this age. So that's another thing you want to really study is communication and knowing your clientele. Like you're in a large group setting, you have to remember you're going to have a big bell curve of people, different personalities, different emotional statuses, because they come from a large variety of places. You're in West Side Barbell, that mentality is pretty much the same. They're all hardcore, I'm going to break you down people. That whole mentality and communication is different and can be relative to almost everybody in there because they only let like-minded people in the gym. But when you're dealing with kids that are redshirt freshmen at 18 and fifth-year seniors are at 22, and you're addressing the entire mob, so to speak, you've got to be well aware of how your approach is, because you can't single out guys who are not ready to be singled out when you're trying to reprimand somebody. And you have to, so it becomes like Jesse said, that's the psychosocial aspects of coaching is really try, not that you got to be like a book report on every kid, but know enough to know that you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, and you have to establish a staff that has personality traits different from you, because as much as I've been very successful with the majority of athletes I've coached, there's always those outliers that I need help from a coach that has a different personality that resonates with that athlete more than mine does.